The bedroom door swung open. Zoe stood in the threshold, her designer silk robe catching the hallway light behind her. The crystal tumbler she'd been carrying slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, scattering glass across the white stone like frozen tears. On the bed, her husband June lay sprawled, his white dress shirt unbuttoned and hanging open. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, the sharp awareness that usually defined Korea's most feared mafia boss completely absent. He looked vulnerable, broken, and on top of him, frozen in absolute terror, was Olivia. The Black Maid's hands were pressed against his chest, her uniform disheveled, her eyes wide with horror as she locked gazes with Zoe. For 3 seconds that stretched into eternity, no one moved. No one breathed. The air in that sole penthouse bedroom turned to ice. Olivia scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bed, her voice cracking. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. He was drunk. I'm so sorry, please." June blinked slowly, his alcohol-soaked brain finally processing what was happening. He pushed himself up on his elbows, looking between his wife and his maid with dawning panic. But his wife didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't slap anyone or throw things or collapse in theatrical despair like women did in the dramas. Instead, she stepped over the broken glass, her bare feet somehow avoiding every sharp edge. She walked to the window overlooking the Seoul skyline, the city lights reflecting in her cold, calculating eyes. She studied them both in the window's reflection, and then she smiled. Just slightly, just enough to be terrifying. "Leave us," Zoe said quietly, her voice steady as a blade. Olivia didn't need to be told twice. She fled from the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving June alone with his wife and the weight of what had just happened. Zoe turned to face her husband, and in that moment, one thought crystallized in her mind with absolute, chilling clarity. He was never infertile. She'd made him believe he was. But now she knew the truth, and everything was about to change. Welcome to my channel, where we bring you the most intense, jaw-dropping stories you won't believe are possible. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now because what you're about to hear will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, betrayal, and revenge. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me take you back to that night in Seoul, to the moment everything shattered. Zoe stood at the window, watching June's reflection as he struggled to sit up properly, his hands shaking as he tried to button his shirt. The alcohol had dulled his reflexes, but not enough to hide the panic crawling across his face. He opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg, but she raised one perfectly manicured hand. "Don't," she said. "You were drunk." She took advantage. It meant nothing. June blinked, confusion replacing panic. "Zoe, I don't understand. This changes nothing between us," she continued, turning to face him fully. Her expression was serene, almost maternal. "You're my husband. We've been through worse than this, haven't we?" He nodded slowly, unable to process her calmness. In their world, in the brutal hierarchy of Korean mafia families, wives killed mistresses. They destroyed reputations. They burned everything to the ground. But Zoe was offering him forgiveness like it was a gift wrapped in silk. "Go to sleep," she whispered, helping him lie back down. "Tomorrow, we'll forget this ever happened." She pulled the covers over him, stroked his hair once, and waited until his breathing deepened into sleep. Then, and only then, did her mask slip. Zoe sat in the leather chair across from the bed, alone in the darkness, her hands gripping the armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. The serene expression melted away, replaced by something cold and calculating. Her mind raced through possibilities, through implications, through the single truth that changed everything. "So it was never you," she whispered to her sleeping husband. "It was always me." But here's where it gets crazy. To understand why Zoe didn't explode that night, why she didn't destroy Olivia on the spot, you have to go back 5 years. Back to when Park Zoe married June not for love, but for power. She was 26, beautiful in that sharp, intimidating way that made men both desire and fear her. She came from old money, the kind of soul wealth that didn't need to prove itself. June was 32, already rising in his family's organization, already marked as the future head. Their marriage was strategic, arranged by families who saw profit in unity. Zoe had one obsession from the beginning: control. She controlled what June wore, who he met with, where he went. She controlled the household staff, the finances, even which family members had access to their home. And most importantly, she controlled whether or not they would have children. Because here's the thing nobody knew. Zoe never wanted to share June's attention. Not with a child. Not with anyone. A baby would shift power away from her, would make her just a mother instead of the queen she'd worked so hard to become. So she made a choice. After every intimate moment with her husband, Zoe would slip into the bathroom and take emergency contraceptive pills she'd stockpiled. Every single time. For months. Then years. And when June started asking why they hadn't conceived yet, when family pressure mounted and whispers started circulating, she made her move. Zoe bribed 3 different fertility specialists, had them run fake tests, had them sit across from June in sterile medical offices, and delivered devastating news with sympathetic expressions. "I'm sorry, Mr. Park. The tests show severe oligospermia. Your sperm count is extremely low. The chances of natural conception are minimal." She watched her husband crumble, watched him absorb the news that he, the heir to a powerful crime family, the man everyone expected to produce the next generation, was infertile. Watched shame seep into his bones. And she comforted him, told him it didn't matter, told him she loved him regardless, all while knowing she'd orchestrated every moment of his pain. The family never blamed Zoe. How could they? She came from good stock, from a family known for producing many children. The problem had to be June. And as the years passed, as the insults and jokes piled up at family gatherings, as his own cousins made veiled comments about his manhood, June retreated further into himself. Zoe got exactly what she wanted, a husband too broken to challenge her, too ashamed to look elsewhere, completely under her control. Until Olivia arrived. Wait, let me tell you about Olivia, because this is where everything starts to make sense. Olivia Chun had come to Seoul 3 years ago from Chicago, the daughter of a Korean mother and a Black American father. She spoke fluent Korean, understood the culture, but her appearance made her perpetually foreign in a city that valued homogeneity. She was 24, educated, beautiful in a way that made people stare, but circumstances had forced her into domestic work. Her mother was sick back in the States. The medical bills were crushing. Olivia needed money fast, and working for wealthy Seoul families paid better than anything she could find back home. So she swallowed her pride, put on the uniform, and became invisible. That's what good maids did. They saw everything and existed as nothing. Olivia worked in the Park household for 2 years before that night. 2 years of watching June move through the penthouse like a ghost, watching Zoe orchestrate every moment of their lives with cold precision, watching a marriage that looked perfect from the outside rot from within. She overheard conversations June had with his few trusted friends when they thought no one was listening. Heard him joke to hide the pain. "If I wasn't broken, I'd have a dozen kids by now." Guess fate had other plans. She saw how Zoe humiliated him in small ways. Saw her dismiss his opinions, contradict him in front of staff, remind him subtly but constantly that he'd failed in the one duty that mattered most to his family. And Olivia felt something she shouldn't have, sympathy. Not attraction. Not initially. Just human compassion for a man who seemed trapped in a prison of shame that he didn't deserve. But sympathy is a dangerous thing. It opens doors that should stay locked. Here's what actually happened that night. And I'm telling you now because the truth is more complicated than what Zoe saw. It was the company's year-end party. June had been forced to attend, to smile and accept congratulations on business successes while enduring whispered comments about his lack of an heir. He'd drunk more than usual, trying to numb the familiar ache of inadequacy. When he came home, he was devastated. Not just drunk, but emotionally shattered in a way Olivia had never seen. So he had already gone to bed, or so everyone thought. She'd actually gone to her private office to handle business calls, leaving June alone. Olivia had been doing her final rounds, collecting glasses, preparing the penthouse for the next day. She found June sitting on the edge of his bed, head in his hands, shoulders shaking. She should have left. Should have pretended not to notice. Instead, she'd asked if he was all right. And June, drunk and broken and so desperately lonely, had looked up at her with tears in his eyes and said, "Do you know what it's like to be told you're not a real man? To have everyone you know look at you like you're defective?" Olivia had frozen. This wasn't her place. This wasn't her business. But she'd sat down beside him. Just for a moment. Just to listen. "You're not defective," she'd said quietly. "Whatever they told you, whatever you believe about yourself, it's not true. You're just human." And something in those words, in the gentleness of her voice, in the first genuine kindness he'd felt in years, broke something inside June. He'd reached for her hand. Not sexually, just contact, human connection. But then his other hand touched her face, and she didn't pull away. And the alcohol and loneliness and years of shame created a moment that spiraled into something neither of them planned. It wasn't passionate. It wasn't violent. It was desperate and sad and achingly human. Two people seeking comfort in the worst possible way. That's when Zoe had opened the door. If you're still watching, drop a comment below telling me what you would have done in Olivia's position. Would you have left the room? Would you have stayed? And make sure you hit that like button, because this story is about to get so much darker. The morning after, Olivia moved through the penthouse like a ghost haunted by its own existence. She avoided every room where June might be, kept her eyes down, her hands busy. Shame burned through her like acid. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, violated trust in a way that made her sick. June tried to speak to her once, catching her in the hallway. Olivia, about last night. It never happened, she'd said, not meeting his eyes. Please. It never happened. She'd started looking for new positions, planning her exit strategy. One more month to save enough money. Then she'd disappear back to the States, consequences be damned. But then Zoe called her into the private study. Olivia had prepared herself for termination, for threats, maybe even for violence. The Park family didn't become powerful by showing mercy. Instead, Zoe had sat behind her mahogany desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Sit, she'd commanded. Olivia sat. What happened last night was unfortunate. Zoe began, her voice measured. My husband was vulnerable. You made a mistake. But I believe in second chances, Olivia. I believe people deserve forgiveness. Olivia had stared, unable to process the words. Your salary is being increased by 40%, effective immediately, Zoe continued. Consider it compensation for the discomfort you experienced. And as far as anyone is concerned, last night never happened. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am, Olivia had whispered. Good. You're dismissed. Olivia had fled from that study more terrified than if Zoe had threatened her life. Because kindness from a woman like that meant something worse was coming. She was right. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the household. June became distant, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. He stopped making eye contact with Olivia entirely, as if she'd become truly invisible. But sometimes she'd catch him staring at where she'd been, a look of profound sadness on his face. Zoe, meanwhile, watched everything with those calculating eyes. She orchestrated moments where June and Olivia would be in the same room, studying their interactions like a scientist observing lab rats. She asked Olivia questions about her family, her background, her plans, all delivered with that same unsettling kindness. And then, 6 weeks after that night, Olivia woke up nauseous. At first, she told herself it was stress, bad food, anything but the truth. But when she missed her period, when the nausea came every morning like clockwork, when her body started changing in ways she couldn't deny, reality crashed down with crushing weight. She bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away, somewhere no one who knew the Park family would see her. Took it in a public bathroom because she couldn't risk anyone in the household finding it. 2 lines. Positive. Undeniable. Olivia sat on that bathroom floor, test and shaking hands, and felt her entire life implode. She knew what happened to women in her position. She'd heard the stories whispered among Seoul's domestic workers. Maids who got pregnant by their employers disappeared. Sometimes they were paid off. Sometimes they were destroyed. Sometimes they simply vanished, and no one asked questions because no one cared about foreign maids with no family connections. But wait, here's the thing that made everything worse. June had started seeking her out, not for anything physical, but to talk. He'd find her in the kitchen late at night when Zoe was asleep, and he'd sit at the counter while she worked, and he'd speak quietly about his life, his regrets, his realization that maybe his shame wasn't deserved. I've been thinking, he'd said one night, about a week before Olivia discovered her pregnancy. About what you said. About being human. I've let them make me believe I'm less than that. My wife, my family, everyone. But maybe. He'd trailed off, looking at her with something that terrified Olivia because she recognized it. Genuine affection. Maybe what? She'd asked, knowing she shouldn't encourage this. Maybe some things aren't my fault, he'd finished quietly. Olivia had wanted to tell him then. Wanted to explain about Zoe's false kindness, about the way his wife watched them like a predator selecting prey. But who would believe the maid over the wife? Who would take her word against the woman who'd shown her such calculated mercy? So she'd said nothing. And now she was pregnant. And she had to disappear before anyone found out. She made her plans carefully, withdrew her increased salary in cash, booked a flight back to Chicago under her mother's maiden name, wrote a resignation letter claiming a family emergency, left it on her bed. And one night, while the Park household slept, Olivia Chun vanished into Seoul's sprawling darkness. She didn't leave a note for June, didn't say goodbye, just disappeared like she'd never existed at all. Except she had existed, and she was carrying proof. The next morning, June found her empty room and felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with shame or inadequacy. He'd lost someone who'd seen him as human when everyone else saw only his failures. So he watched her husband search for the maid with barely concealed satisfaction. She made sympathetic noises, helped him contact employment agencies, all while knowing exactly why Olivia had run. Because Zoe had seen it too. The pregnancy. She'd noticed the nausea, the subtle changes in Olivia's body, the way the maid's uniform was getting tighter. She'd calculated the timing, done the math, and reached the conclusion that changed everything. Her husband wasn't infertile. He never had been. And now there was proof of that growing inside a woman who'd fled into the night. Zoe had two choices: expose the truth and lose her position of power, or control the narrative before it controlled her. She chose control. She always chose control. Now here's where things get absolutely insane. So stay with me, because this twist is going to blow your mind. For months past, June moved through his life like a man underwater, going through motions without feeling anything. The family noticed his distraction, his lack of focus, but attributed it to his ongoing shame about the heir situation. They didn't know he was mourning a black maid who'd shown him kindness for a few brief weeks. Zoe, meanwhile, had been busy. She'd hired private investigators to track Olivia, learned she'd returned to Chicago, learned about her sick mother and desperate financial situation. She'd collected information like weapons, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came when Olivia returned to Seoul. She came back not because she wanted to, but because her mother had died and the medical bills had consumed every dollar she'd saved. She was 5 months pregnant, showing enough that loose clothing barely hid it, desperate enough to risk everything for one of the only job prospects she had, her old position at the Park household. She knew it was insane, knew it was dangerous, but desperation makes people do impossible things. Olivia stood outside the Park building on a cold February evening, gathering courage to press the intercom. Before she could, the door opened, and June stood there, having just returned from a meeting. They stared at each other, for months of absence collapsing into a single moment of recognition. "You came back," June said, his voice breaking on the words. "I had nowhere else to go," Olivia whispered. He looked at her, really looked, and his eyes traveled down to where her coat couldn't quite hide the curve of her stomach. Understanding crashed across his face like a wave, followed by something Olivia had never expected to see: joy. "Is that?" He couldn't finish the question. Olivia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I should have." But June had pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that made her sob harder. "Don't apologize," he said into her hair. "Don't ever apologize. Do you understand what this means? That I ruined everything?" Olivia asked. "That I'm not broken," June breathed. "That everything they told me, everything I believed about myself, was a lie." They stood there in the cold Seoul evening, two people bound together by a child neither had planned, while 15 floors above them, Zoe watched from the penthouse window with a smile that would have frozen blood. She'd expected this, planned for it, and now the final pieces of her revenge were falling into place. "Before I continue, I need you to do something for me. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, if you're invested in what happens to Olivia and June and their impossible situation, smash that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. And drop a comment telling me, do you think Zoe is the villain here, or is there more to her than we know? Now let's get back to Seoul, where everything is about to explode. June brought Olivia inside through a service entrance, not to hide her, but to protect her from the questions that would come. He took her to a guest room far from the master bedroom, made sure she had food, warmth, everything she needed. Then he sat beside her bed and held her hand like she was made of glass. "I don't understand any of this," he said quietly. "4 months ago, you disappeared without a word. Now you're back, pregnant with my child. And I should be angry, but all I feel is grateful. Your wife? Olivia started. I'll handle Zoe, June interrupted. She knew. That night she walked in. She knew what happened, and she told me it meant nothing. She'll understand. But Olivia had seen Zoe's eyes, had felt the weight of that calculated kindness. June, I don't think you understand what she is. She's my wife, he said simply. And yes, our marriage is complicated. But she's not cruel. She'll see reason. Olivia wanted to scream that he was wrong, that he'd been living with a monster wearing his wife's face for 5 years. But he looked so hopeful, so relieved to finally have proof of his worth, that she couldn't crush him. Not yet. Zoe, of course, already knew Olivia was back. Her building security reported everything. She'd watched the reunion on security footage, seen the way June touched Olivia's stomach with reverent wonder, seen the intimacy between them that went beyond physical attraction. And she'd begun her plan. The next morning, Zoe requested a family meeting. Not just with June, but with his father, his uncles, the key members of the park organization. They gathered in the penthouse's formal dining room. 12 of the most dangerous men in Seoul sitting around mahogany, waiting to hear what the wife of their heir had to say. June arrived last, tension evident in every line of his body. Thank you all for coming, Zoe began, standing at the head of the table with the Seoul skyline behind her. I've called you here to share miraculous news. June's eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. After 5 years of trying, after all the medical consultations and disappointments, I'm pregnant. Silence crashed through the room. Then chaos. Congratulations, shock, joy, questions fired from every direction. June's father stood and embraced his daughter-in-law with tears in his eyes. Through it all, June sat frozen, staring at his wife. Because he'd seen the security footage, knew she'd watched him with Olivia, knew she understood exactly what was happening. And she was lying, claiming a pregnancy that wasn't hers. Zoe, he said quietly, cutting through the celebration. Can we speak privately? Of course, darling, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They excused themselves to the study. The moment the door closed, June turned on her. What are you doing? Protecting this family, Zoe replied calmly. Protecting you. That's not your child. You're not pregnant. Not yet, she agreed. But I will be. Or rather, I'll appear to be. It's amazing what modern medicine and strategic padding can accomplish. June felt his world tilting. The maid, Zoe interrupted, is currently in a guest room carrying what could be your only heir. A heir who, if revealed, would destroy this family's reputation. The bastard child of a mafia boss and his Black Maid? Can you imagine the shame? The mockery? That's my child, June said, his voice shaking. And it will be raised as ours, Zoe continued. Olivia will live here, comfortable and safe, until she gives birth. Then she'll deliver, and we'll tell everyone the child is mine. She'll be compensated generously for her silence, and she'll disappear back to America with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. You can't be serious. I'm saving you, Zoe said, her mask finally cracking to show the rage beneath. Do you know what I've sacrificed to keep your pathetic reputation intact? 5 years of my life, playing the supportive wife to a man everyone mocks. 5 years of watching you wallow in shame that I created because it was the only way to keep you controllable. And now, when you finally prove you're not the failure everyone thinks you are, you want to throw it all away for a maid. The words hung between them like poison. You created my shame? June whispered. Zoe's smile returned, cold and victorious. The fertility tests were fake. All of them. You were never infertile. I made sure you believed you were because a desperate, shameful husband is an obedient husband. But I underestimated your need for comfort, your weakness for kindness. So now we adapt. June stared at the woman he'd been married to for 5 years, seeing her clearly for the first time. You destroyed me. Deliberately. I controlled you, Zoe corrected. And I will continue to control this situation. Olivia will give birth. We will take the child. She will leave. And this family will finally have its heir, with no one the wiser. Everyone wins. Except Olivia. Except her child. Except me. You'll have your heir, Zoe said dismissively. Isn't that what you wanted? But here's the twist no one saw coming. And I mean no one. Not even Zoe with all her planning and manipulation. Olivia had been listening. The study's ventilation system connected to the guest rooms. She'd heard every word of Zoe's confession, every detail of the 5-year deception. And she'd recorded it all on her phone. She sat in that guest room, hand over her stomach, protecting the child growing inside her, and made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to be controlled. Wasn't going to let this woman take her baby and pretend it was hers. Wasn't going to let June remain in the dark about what his wife truly was. But she also knew she couldn't fight the Park family openly. They had power, money, connections. She was a foreign maid with no resources. So she did something smarter. She called June's father. The old man arrived at the penthouse an hour later, confused about why the maid would request a private meeting. Olivia met him in the study, where the conversation had taken place, and she played him the recording. Every word, every confession, every detail of Soi's manipulation. The old man's face turned to stone as he listened. When it finished, he looked at Olivia with new respect. "You're the one carrying my grandson?" "Yes, sir," Olivia said quietly. "And my son knows?" "He knows about the baby. He didn't know about his wife's deception until today." The old man stood, straightened his jacket, and made a phone call. Within 20 minutes, the family was reassembled. Soi arrived expecting another celebration. Instead, she found a tribunal. "Park Soi," June's father began, his voice cold. "You will explain to this family why you would sabotage your own husband's fertility, lie about medical tests, and attempt to steal another woman's child." Soi's perfect mask cracked completely. She looked at Olivia, understanding and rage warring on her face. "You recorded me. I protected myself," Olivia replied calmly. What happened next was swift and brutal. The Park family valued many things: reputation, power, loyalty. But they valued heirs above all else. Soi had revealed herself as someone who would sacrifice the family's future for personal control. That couldn't stand. She was given a choice: quiet divorce with a settlement that would keep her comfortable but powerless, or public exposure of her actions and complete destruction. Soi chose survival. She always did. Within a week, she'd signed the papers and disappeared from Seoul, taking her settlement money and her shattered pride. The family announced a quiet separation, attributing it to irreconcilable differences. And Olivia, the black maid from Chicago, found herself in an impossible position. June wanted to marry her, wanted to make everything legitimate, give their child his name properly. But Olivia had seen too much, knew too much about what that life would demand. She'd watched Soi's desperation for control destroy everyone around her. She didn't want that for herself or her child. "I can't marry you," she told June one evening, 6 months pregnant and finally feeling safe. "Not because I don't care about you, but because that life, this world, it's not who I am." "Then what do you want?" June asked, desperate. "I want our child to know you," Olivia said. "I want them to have a relationship with you, with this family. But I need to be my own person, not your wife, not your obligation, just the mother of your child." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something messier and more real. Olivia gave birth to a son on a humid August evening. She named him Daniel, a name that worked in both English and Korean. June was there for the birth, holding her hand, weeping when he heard his son cry for the first time. The Park family accepted Daniel as the heir, though whispers circulated about his foreign mother. June paid for a house in Chicago where Olivia could raise Daniel near her family, but they spent summers in Seoul, where the boy learned his father's language and culture. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. June never remarried. He threw himself into his work, but every evening, he video called his son, reading Korean folktales and teaching him words in halting English. He sent money, more than enough, but more importantly, he sent love. And Olivia, who'd once been invisible, raised a son who would bridge two worlds. But wait, remember when I said there was a twist? We're not done yet. 3 years after Daniel's birth, June received a package. No return address. Inside was a flash drive and a note in Soi's handwriting. "You should know the truth." He plugged the drive into his computer. On it was a single video file dated from 2 weeks before she'd left Seoul. In the video, Soi sat in a sterile medical office, receiving test results. June watched her face crumble as the doctor spoke words he couldn't hear. Then the doctor handed her paperwork, and the camera zoomed close enough to read the diagnosis. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3. Inoperable. The video cut to Soi in a hotel room, recording a message directly to camera. "June, by the time you see this, I'll either be dead or very close to it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to understand why I did what I did." Her voice was weak, nothing like the controlled woman he'd known. "I found out about the cancer a month before we got married. The doctor said I'd never be able to have children, and the treatments would likely kill me within 5 years. So I made a choice. I married you anyway. I took the fertility you had and made you believe it was gone because if I couldn't have children, I couldn't bear for you to have them with someone else. Tears streaked down her face. It was cruel. It was unforgivable. But I loved you in my own broken way, and I couldn't imagine you building a family with someone else while I died slowly. So I tried to make sure neither of us would have that future. She wiped her eyes. Olivia came along and destroyed my plans. She gave you the one thing I never could. And instead of being grateful that you'd have an heir, that the family would continue, I tried to steal it. Because I'm selfish. Because I'm petty. Because I'd rather burn everything down than admit I failed. She smiled weakly. You have your son now. Raise him well. Teach him to be better than us. And when he asks about me someday, tell him his father's first wife was complicated. That's enough. The video ended. June sat in his study, staring at the blank screen. He thought about the 5 years he'd spent believing he was broken, about the shame Zoe had made him carry. He thought about Olivia, about Daniel, about the messy, imperfect family they'd built from catastrophe. And he felt something unexpected, pity for the woman who tortured him. Because Zoe had been right about one thing. She was complicated. They all were. 6 months later, June received a death notice. Zoe had passed away in a private clinic in Switzerland, alone except for nurses. She'd left everything in her will to Daniel's education fund. June told Olivia about the video. They sat together in the Chicago house, watching their son play in the yard, and talked about the woman who'd nearly destroyed them both. Do you forgive her? Olivia asked. June thought about it for a long time. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word, but I understand her now. And maybe that's enough. Now, if you've made it this far, you need to hit that subscribe button right now because we have more stories just as intense as this one coming your way. Drop a comment telling me what you think about Zoe. Was she a villain or a victim? And hit that like button because this story needs to be shared. Daniel grew up knowing both his parents, understanding both his worlds. He learned Korean and English. He spent summers in Seoul learning about his father's business and winters in Chicago learning about his mother's roots. He was confident in a way neither parent had been, secure in an identity that didn't fit neat categories. When he turned 7, June finally told him about Zoe. Not the full story, but an age-appropriate version. He showed him her picture, explained that she'd been sick, that she'd made choices because she was scared. Was she mean? Daniel asked. June considered this carefully. She was hurt, and hurt people sometimes hurt others. But she also made sure you'd have everything you needed, even after she was gone. Do you miss her? Sometimes, June admitted. I miss the person she could have been if she hadn't been so afraid. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said about his first wife. Years passed. Daniel became a teenager, then a young man. He chose to split his time between countries, studying international business with the understanding that he'd eventually take over his father's legitimate operations. The Park family had been transitioning away from their criminal enterprises, and Daniel represented the future they were building. Olivia never married. She had relationships, but nothing serious. She'd given her heart once, in a moment of weakness that became the best mistake of her life, and she was content with that. She watched her son grow into someone remarkable and knew every sacrifice had been worth it. June aged into his role as family patriarch, respected but lonely. He loved his son fiercely but lived with the absence of partnership. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered what would have happened if he'd met Olivia under different circumstances. If they could have built something real without the weight of betrayal and pain. But mostly, he was grateful. Grateful for Daniel. Grateful for the truth, even though it had hurt. Grateful that somewhere in the chaos, something good had emerged. And that's where our story ends. Or does it? Because here's the thing. 3 months ago, Daniel turned 25, and he received a letter, delivered by a lawyer, that had been sealed for 22 years. It was from Zoe. Inside was a confession more detailed than the video. A full accounting of everything she'd done, every lie she'd told, every person she'd manipulated. It included evidence, photographs, medical records proving the falsified fertility tests. But at the end, there was something else. A revelation that changed everything one final time. Zoe had discovered something in her final weeks, going through old family records. Something she'd verified before her death, but kept secret because she wanted Daniel to decide what to do with the information when he was old enough to understand. June's family, the Park organization, had been responsible for the death of Olivia's father 20 years ago. It had been a business deal gone wrong, a territorial dispute that had ended with a Black American businessman killed in Seoul, and the case quietly closed with bribes and threats. Olivia had never known. June had never known. The old men who'd ordered it were long dead. But Daniel knew now. He sat in a coffee shop in Seoul, his father across from him, the letter between them. June had just finished reading it, his face ashen. Your mother's father, June whispered. My family killed him. Before you were born. Before Olivia and I ever met. Daniel stared at his father, processing. Does she know? No. Soe verified it was kept from her. Why would Soe tell me this? What did she gain? June looked at his son, seeing pieces of both him and Olivia in the young man's face. Maybe she wanted you to have a choice she never did. The choice to know the full truth and decide what to do with it. Do I tell Mom? That's your decision, June said quietly. But whatever you choose, I'll support you. And if Olivia wants justice, wants answers, wants to destroy what's left of the Park family for what we took from her, I won't stand in the way. Daniel sat back, overwhelmed. This is insane. Yes. Soe knew this would probably destroy everything. Our relationship. The family. Everything we've built. She was complicated, June said again. Daniel looked at his father. This man who'd been broken and rebuilt, who'd lost his first wife to cancer and bitterness, who'd found redemption in a son he'd never planned. What would you do? If you were me? June was quiet for a long time. Then, I'd ask your mother what she wants. Not what I think she should want. Not what's convenient for the family. But what she needs to heal. So Daniel flew back to Chicago. He sat with his mother in the house his father had bought, the house where he'd grown up, and he told her everything. About the fertility lies. About Soe's cancer. About the video. And about her father. Olivia listened in silence. When Daniel finished, she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where she'd rebuilt her life. I always wondered, she said finally, how he died. The police said it was random violence, but it never made sense. My father was careful. He didn't take risks. What do you want to do? Daniel asked, echoing his father. Olivia turned to face her son. Do you know what the hardest part of that night was? When Soe found me with your father. Daniel shook his head. It wasn't the shame. It wasn't the fear of being fired. It was realizing that I'd given a piece of myself to a world that had taken everything from my family and would never see me as anything more than the help. She sat back down. Your father's family took my father. Soe took years of your father's dignity. And somehow, from all that taking, you were born. Mom, I don't want revenge, Olivia said firmly. I don't want to destroy the Park family or expose old crimes. What I want is for you to understand that the world is more complicated than good and evil. Sometimes the people who hurt us are hurting too. Sometimes the people we love come from places that damaged us. And sometimes we have to choose between justice and peace. What are you choosing? Peace, Olivia said. I'm choosing peace. For you. For your father. For the memory of my father, who would want me to build rather than destroy. She pulled her son into her arms. Soe gave you this information as a test. She wanted to see if her confession would fracture everything or if we were strong enough to absorb one more truth. Well, we are. We're strong enough. And that's the real ending. Not revenge. Not destruction. Just the complicated, messy choice to absorb pain and keep building anyway. Daniel told his father about Olivia's decision. June wept. Not from relief, but from the grace of it. He'd taken a vow that day. Every success the Park family achieved, every legitimate business milestone, would be marked with a donation to organizations helping Black Americans in Asia, supporting mixed-race families, funding causes Olivia's father would have cared about. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. The story could end there. A family finding peace after decades of pain. But Soe had one final surprise. In her will, sealed until Daniel turned 25, was a trust fund. Not for Daniel, but for a scholarship program. Full rides to Korean universities for Black students wanting to study in Seoul. It would be administered by Daniel and Olivia, funded by everything Soe had taken in her divorce settlement. The program was named after Olivia's father. When they read the will, when they understood what Soe had done, Daniel looked at his mother. Why? Because, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face, she was complicated. And maybe, at the very end, she found a way to be sorry. If you've watched this far, thank you. This story is about the messy reality of human beings trying to navigate pain, love, betrayal, and redemption. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. 1. Subscribe to this channel because we bring you the most intense, real stories you won't find anywhere else. 2. Hit that like button if this story moved you. And 3. Comment below and tell me, do you think Zoe found redemption? Could you forgive someone who'd done what she did if they tried to make amends at the end? The scholarship program launched 3 years ago. It's sent 14 students to Korean universities so far. Daniel runs it personally, interviewing each applicant, making sure they understand the complicated history behind the funding. June lives in Seoul, still running the family business, now completely legitimate. He's 60 now, silver in his hair, weight of decades in his eyes. He video calls Daniel every evening, same as he's done for 25 years. Olivia works as a consultant helping immigrant families navigate professional opportunities in Asia. She's 50 now, still beautiful, still carrying herself with the dignity that first caught June's attention decades ago, in a moment neither planned. They see each other a few times a year, always cordial, always maintaining the boundaries they set so long ago. There's affection there, and respect, and the shared love of their son. But there's also the weight of everything that happened, everything that can't be undone. Sometimes Daniel asks if they ever thought about trying again, about building something real now that all the lies are exposed, all the pain addressed. They always give the same answer. Some relationships are defined by what they created, not what they could become. And maybe that's okay. Because from manipulation and betrayal and tragedy, they made something beautiful. They made Daniel. They made a program that helps others. They made peace with the parts of themselves that had been broken. Zoe's ashes were scattered in the Han River per her final wishes. No funeral, no ceremony, just ashes returning to water, dissolving into Seoul's heart. But her impact remained. In the son she tried to steal. In the program she funded. In the truth she finally told. She was complicated. She was cruel. She was human. And in the end, maybe she found a way to be more than the worst thing she'd ever done. That's where this story actually ends. Not with vengeance or tragedy, but with the hard-won understanding that life is rarely simple. People are rarely just one thing, and sometimes the most profound victories come from choosing peace over justice. If this story resonated with you, if you've made it all the way to the end, do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone struggling with forgiveness. Someone trying to make sense of complicated relationships. Someone who needs to know that it's possible to build something good from the wreckage of betrayal. Subscribe, like, comment. Let me know your thoughts. And remember, every story we tell here is about the complexity of being human. The good, the bad, and everything in between. Thank you for watching. Until next time.